Thank you for joining us on the South Carolina Realtors Property Tax Webinar. I'm Cashion Drolet, the Association's Chief Lobbyist. I have with me Byron King, the Association's Vice President and General Counsel, and we have a special guest with us today. We are joined by Rick Dolan. Rick is the assessor from Lexington County here in Columbia. Rick attended Irmo High School before graduating from Coastal Carolina University. Rick has served as the Director of Assessment and Equalization of Lexington County for the past 11 years. Mr. Dolan previously held such title in Georgetown County for 10 years. He holds a certified residential appraiser license with the state of South Carolina, and collectively he has more than 28 years experience in ad valorem taxation and has overseen 6 reassessment programs. Rick also is a sports fanatic and proud supporter of the South Carolina Gamecocks. Moreover, he realizes his greatest blessings are his wife and 3 children, 3 beautiful daughters. Thank you for being here with us, Rick. I'm going to kick off our webinar this morning just to talk a little bit about the legislation, about the legislative history, where we started, the problem we tried to fix, and where we are today, and future steps that we're going to take. In 2006, the South Carolina General Assembly passed a broad property tax reform measure, which we call Act 388. So 2006, they passed the bill that took the school operating millage off of 4% owner-occupied property and shifted it to everything else, 6 and 10.5%. Act 388, as you all know, has created gross inequities in tax values and tax burdens. We've seen a tremendous shift in the tax burden to non-owner occupied, to commercial, to industrial properties. In addition to that tax shift, we also experienced in Act 388 a dramatic tax increase on homes, land, and businesses when they're sold. This is what the association has dubbed as point-of-sale assessment. Point-of-sale assessment has had a really negative impact on the real estate market, particularly in the commercial market, but residential market as well. In the commercial market, we've seen higher tax bills, loss of equity as buildings have been devalued, some serious negative implications on net operating income, unfair trade advantages to properties that haven't sold who are able to offer lower lease costs. And we've also got some disincentives to transfer property. In the residential market, we've seen gross differences between tax values for neighboring properties, essentially 2 identical properties that are taxed at 2 different assessment levels. We've seen a loss on investment income for people who are investing in 6% residential property, and we've also seen folks who are reluctant to downsize or to upsize because of the increased tax burden and the tax implications that would have. Beyond the real estate market, there have also been some negative economic consequences across the state related to point-of-sale assessment. We've heard time and time again from businesses from across the country that they will not locate in South Carolina based on the tax implications. The 6% assessment, the 10.5% assessment combined with the point of sale tax increase, it's just made it not profitable to do business in South Carolina. Our existing businesses are penalized for expansion and growth because of property tax increases for growing their business, and we've seen that small businesses have particularly been hurt the hardest because these are the businesses that aren't large enough to qualify for fee in lieu of tax agreements. So point of sale has dinged them pretty significantly. All this points to a stagnating South Carolina's economy and dampens job creation, which is something that our state needs, frankly, more than ever. SCR South Carolina Realtors began working on point of sale in 2008. We had legislation introduced into the General Assembly in 2009. Immediately, the opposition came from local governments, city and county and school boards who were already unhappy with Act 388. Then Act 388 combined with the economic downturn, they really just refused to give up any any extra revenue that point of sale had provided to their budgets, and they just dug in on point of sale assessment reform bills. They blocked them every which way that they could. We passed a bill through the House several times to have our efforts undone in the Senate. The association in 2010 began an aggressive media and grassroots campaign. Our goal was to talk to some of our opposition legislators in their terms, in their districts, with their constituents. We did some focus groups and some polling to try to determine how to message this issue, how to help folks, homeowners, business owners understand, because point of sale and property tax assessment in general is a fairly tough subject to get your hands around. And so we did some focus groups to determine what the proper message was so that folks could understand when they went to speak with their House member or senator what message that should be sent. So we coalesced around this idea of the unfair tax, which I know that all of our members are fully aware of. The unfair tax campaign included some targeted direct mail in specific districts across the state, some pieces targeting legislators who stood in the association's way, as well as some thank yous and thumbs up for legislators who were very helpful along the way. We did a huge email campaign through the association's grassroots software, as well as through Facebook. And we also did some direct calls into the Senate, and I think we pushed about 2,000 calls into the South Carolina Senate over the course of 3 days. In 2011, we had legislation introduced into the House and Senate. Representative Jim Merrill from Berkeley County and Senator Paul Campbell, also from Berkeley County, both introduced companion bills. We ran 2 bills at once that would have eliminated point of sale and across all classes of property, and would have made the point of sale assessment form retroactive. So it would have gone back to property years prior to this one, or property tax years prior to this one. Those were the sort of the pie in the sky ideal legislation for the association, and that's where we started. As y'all know, through the legislative process, things change, and things change quickly. Virtually no bill is identical at its passage to how it was introduced. Everything gets amended along the way, and compromise and meeting of the minds has to happen to get anything done in the South Carolina General Assembly. Our bill was first heard in the House, was passed out of subcommittee virtually unamended, got to full committee, Ways and Means Committee, passed that committee, and got to the House floor. The House floor, we were in a posture to have to amend. The House amended the bill to simply delay implementation of point of sale to the next county equalization program. So that 5-year cycle, when everybody is up, it would have delayed implementation of that point of sale assessment increase to that point. That bill passed the House 64-51. It was a close margin. Our opposition worked very hard against that bill, and at the end of the day, we prevailed on that vote, 64-51. Concurrently in the Senate, Senator Campbell's bill was heard in Senate Finance Subcommittee. It was heard in Senate Finance Committee, and ultimately was reported favorably to the Senate floor. Under the Senate rules, any one senator can kill any one bill. So our bill got 2 objections immediately as soon as it went to the Senate floor, effectively killing the legislation for the rest of the year. It's very difficult to get anything controversial done in the Senate, and about 90% of all bills that ever go to the Senate floor eventually die because of one senator's objection. The House bill crossed over to the Senate. It went to the Senate Finance Committee, and it sort of languished there. We were constantly discussing and negotiating with the opposition on point of sale reform. We had legislators intervene and force us to have a meeting of the minds on the issue. We were just never able to find a reasonable compromise to which both sides could agree. However, the last weeks of session, the last 2 weeks of the legislative session in May and June, Senator Leatherman, who is Senate Finance Committee Chairman, a very powerful senator from Florence County, came to both groups and said, look, guys, we're going to iron this issue out, and I want you to sit in a room and figure out some sort of a solution to this crisis, because otherwise I'm going to come up with a solution, and it's going to be something that neither of y'all will like. We sat in a room, and over the course of 2 weeks and in an 8-hour meeting, 6 to 8 hour meeting, we're able to iron out a compromise that final week of session. So the last week of session, we had the House bill recalled from the Senate Finance Committee, reported to the Senate floor, given second reading one day, third reading the last day of session. The bill went back to the House that last day of session. The House agreed, they concurred in the Senate amendments, and the bill was enrolled for ratification. It was signed by Governor Haley on June 14th. She very kindly did a formal bill signing ceremony for the realtors on August 15th. We did that down in Berkeley County, where our bill sponsors were. And we had a tremendous event that was well attended by realtors and legislators. The compromise that was passed into law and signed into law by the governor deals with 6% property only. So that's status quo for 4% and for 10.5%. Under the compromise, 6% properties receive a 25% discount off of the fair market value. So a 25% discount off of that sales value, the assessable transfer of interest value. There's a couple of terms that are used to describe that fair market value. In the case where that 25% reduction would result in a taxable value that's less than what is currently the taxable value on the tax books, then that lower previous value would remain in place. If the fair market value is less than the value of the property's previous taxable value, that value that was on the books prior to the sale, then the lower fair market value would become the taxable value. That lower taxable value as a result of the 25% reduction remains the value until the next assessable transfer of interest occurs, so the next time the property is sold, or until the next countywide equalization program, that 5-year tax reassessment cycle. The compromise also ensured that improvement to a property did not trigger a tax reassessment. We had some issues where a roof on a large warehousing facility, a roof replacement on a large warehousing facility, which is ultimately just maintenance, triggered the ATI and a huge tax increase. So we wanted to ensure that that didn't happen again. The compromise applies to all transactions after January 1st, 2011. And it also included some rollback and millage banking provisions that were sought by the local governments in separate legislation that were included in there as carrots, essentially, to get them to come to the table. Did we get 100% of what we want in the compromise? Absolutely not. But point of sale reform, I think we can call it a success. We didn't get 100% of what we wanted, but rarely in the legislative world does any one group get 100% of what they want. Though point of sale reform was a success in 2011, we still have a lot of work to do on property tax reform in general in South Carolina. The South Carolina Realtors support broad property tax reforms that will bring equity to all classes of property. We feel strongly that unless and until the South Carolina General Assembly is prepared to reform property taxes, economic development, job creation, school funding, equity, all of those things are going to continue to suffer. If we want to be able to compete with our neighboring states, with our regional states, and states across the country, we've got to enact some property tax reform. And the association's been working with legislators, members of the House and members of the Senate, in trying to craft some sort of a solution to fix the problems caused by Act 388, to give South Carolina the ability to step forward, compete economically with the rest of the country. This is a priority for the association for the coming session and sessions, and we plan to be aggressive. Comprehensive tax reform has been something that's been discussed in the General Assembly for the past couple of years, and it's even been an issue whether comprehensive tax reform includes property tax reform. The General Assembly set up sort of a blue ribbon commission a couple of years ago. They called it the Tax Realignment Commission, the TRAC Commission. They weren't even allowed to look at property taxes, and they produced a report. It was about this thick, and ultimately it went on shelves. It never really saw the light of day, never really was debated. Presently, there's a House Republican Study Committee that's looking at tax reform generally, and property tax is something that they have been discussing. Governor Haley has also referenced comprehensive tax reform and property tax reform specifically. She even sort of punctuated her comments at our point of sale bill signing to say this is the first step in the right direction, but we have many steps yet to take on property tax reform. So we were pretty excited to hear her say that. But we have yet to see any real solutions presented by anybody in the legislative world. So we await that, and we'll be pushing aggressively for the General Assembly and the Governor's office to come forward with some sort of solution. There's also sort of an outlier issue out there that the legislative world and the lobbying world is watching very closely. There's a case pending before the South Carolina Supreme Court where a citizen has challenged the constitutionality of all of the state's sales tax exemptions. So that's, I think, $500 million worth of sales tax exemptions that are out there, and the question is, was the General Assembly correct and right and constitutional in setting and allowing for those? The case is set to be heard in December, and so we're all sort of watching with bated breath, because if the case prevails, if the plaintiff prevails, all of the sales tax exemptions are going to be thrown out, and the General Assembly, their hand is going to be forced on property tax, on comprehensive tax reform, property tax reform. Essentially, they will be forced to rewrite the tax code. So that could really shake things up and could bring about reform sooner than we maybe would anticipate. And that will conclude my legislative history and future report. And I am delighted to hand the microphone over to Assessor Dolan, who is going to talk generally about some assessment issues and appeals, etc.
A lot of the issues that were just mentioned here are the issues that I'm dealing with daily with the commercial owners. And with Act 388 being passed, most of the assessors in the state were against it at the beginning, but the public voted for that, and I think it was overwhelming, more than 80%. Did the public know the entire part of it? I don't know. But I hear the issues, and I've heard the issues that they're not going to do business in South Carolina. And, all we can do is go with what the laws say until something else is passed. So we sent our tax bills out, and I'm hearing these issues again. In 2010, we had a countywide reassessment. And now in 2011, with the millage rate going up some, school taxes going up some, I'm hearing these issues again. And it does hurt the 6% businesses. So, what can we do? I'm not sure. My personal opinion is, being a citizen of South Carolina, is we need to find a better way to fund the schools. On 6% property in Lexington County, 75% of the tax bill goes to the schools. So we, a group here of citizens of South Carolina, we got to come up with a way to fund the schools. They keep cutting the school budget, and what does it do when they cut the school budget? They put it on 6% homeowners, and that hurts all property. So.
Well, thank you. I think our members are very interested in hearing about the assessment appeal process and some general comments about how they should appeal tax values. We've got a number of counties that are in equalization programs. Tax notices or tax assessment notices have gone out, and we have a lot of folks that are sort of in the midst of the appeal process, and I know they would be interested in hearing
Okay.
your perspective on perhaps how Lexington County is handling it, any sort of advice that the Association of Counties has provided to the counties in the state undergoing the equalization program.
As you know, Lexington County, or I mentioned earlier, went through a countywide reassessment in 2010. So by law, we had to use sales up to 12/31/2009. Assessment notices went out. The taxpayer has 90 days to appeal. If they did not appeal, they can appeal the following year. 2011 was not a reassessment year, so the taxpayers can appeal up until January 15th, 2012, unless they got an assessment notice, and then it was 90 days from the assessment notice. The laws have told us, or the courts have ruled, that all sales that are used as of the last reassessment date. So if somebody buys a piece of property in 2011, for the 2011 tax year, we have to appraise it as the property sat on 12/31/2009, and the ATI will not kick in until the 2012 year. ATI being the point of sale assessable transfer of interest. So we have some counties that have not reassessed in 3 or 4 years. So they're still using the values of the previous reassessment. And while the values have gone down some, the law still requires us to appraise it as of the last reassessment. So it could be a lower value on the market today, but the law requires us to appraise it as of the last reassessment date, which is, in Lexington County, would be 12/31/2009. And that's upset some people too. And, we work with them, we try to explain the way the law reads, and until there's some law changes, we're kind of stuck with the reassessment date.
Joe Rosen said Aiken and Charleston went through a reassessment this year, but they used December 31st, 2008 as a date value. How can they do this?
If Aiken and Charleston County, each county in the state is on a 5-year reassessment cycle. If they're using 2008 and they sent it out this year, they were required to reassess in 2009, so they had to use sales up until 2008. The law does allow certain counties to extend it for another year. And so while they're using sales dates up to 12/31/2008, they must have elected to go with that 1 year, postpone the reassessment for 1 year. That doesn't mean they get 5 more years. If you postpone it 1 year, you're still required to reassess 4 years later. So Lexington County is on a reassessment cycle of 2005, 2010, and our next one is scheduled for 2015.
Okay. Byron, do you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about how to handle tax issues with contracts and
Sure, I can do that. I'm Byron King, your general counsel to the legal hotline. Wanted to thank Cashion.
That's great. That's the word I was looking for.
For all the work she's done on this issue, and I see a lot of friendly names up there on the board. The participants want to thank you guys for coming to the rallies and contacting your elected representatives. And this will be archived. It's October 2011, so everything we're saying is accurate as of today. So if you're watching this archived, legal disclaimer. Contact the legal hotline. If you have clients, make sure that you refer them to their tax attorney and their financial advisor for tax advice. One of the things, like Cashion mentioned, we've been working on, our Reforms Committee has been working on some contract issues, and Beth Ross is our chair down in Myrtle Beach. And one of the issues we've been looking at is reproration after closing. So one of the things that the Reforms Committee is looking at doing is once the tax bill comes out, if there's a differential, say it's greater than 10% of the tax differential, the parties will have agreed to get back together and reprorate and settle up and make sure everybody's paying their share of the property taxes. The other issue that the hotline gets a lot of time on the contract is the certificate of assessment. Even though that sounds like a tax issue, it's in paragraph 13. What that really is, it is the price of the document from the Owners Association, the Condo Owners Association, to find out if there's any assessments on the property. So that's a tax question we get a lot of times. It's really not a tax question, but those are the two issues on the contract that we're dealing with right now. And one of the things that we get a lot of calls on, Assessor Dolan, is how the assessment works when you send out, because my understanding is you guys hire a bunch of appraisers to go out and do mass appraisals on the county, all the properties in the county. How does?
Well, in Lexington County, I have 16 licensed real estate appraisers. And the 16 real estate appraisers work in 16 geographical areas. They're responsible for every deed transfer, every new construction, every appeal, anything that goes on with that area of the county. And that's been working real well because the taxpayer gets to know the appraiser, and they have questions, they can call them directly. How we appraise property, there's several things we appraise. There's three approaches to value. There's an income approach, there's a market approach, and there's a cost approach. Lexington County uses a cost approach, but blends it with the market. So if a cost to build a house is a lot more than what the market would indicate, we will go with the lower market value if there's enough sales to justify that. We're, like I said, we're all licensed real estate appraisers, and we're going to appraise it a lot of times based on what is being sold in the open market based on the deeds.
Super. And then I know a lot of people are sophisticated in this type area, but I want to go back kind of some basics, kind of the 101 of property taxes. So your job's really setting the value of the property, and then you're going to multiply that times the assessed value, and then the county will give you the millage rate. So you multiply all those and then subtract some of the tax credits, like if somebody's homestead or disabled.
Right.
So when they appeal, they contact, what's kind of the appeals process? Say they call your office? Is that how it works?
Every appeal has to be made in writing. You just don't call the office and say, I want to appeal. We have to have it in writing, checks and balances. In my county, when someone writes a letter, we'll set them up an appointment to meet with the real estate appraiser of my area. In my county, wherever they live at. We got property owners have multiple properties, and we try to set them up with the best appraiser that they can in the geographical area, but that doesn't always work. So we try to get one appraiser to handle it, then he'll feed it to the other appraisers if they have multiple areas. What we'll do is we'll sit down with the taxpayer and discuss their concerns. And we are bound by law on how to do certain things. So when a taxpayer comes in and says, there's a lot of online value programs out there. Problems with that is the Zillow, and I think Drolet is another one. They will give you all the sales in a zip code area. Problem is you got to have a nice subdivision compared to a subdivision that has a lot smaller homes, and they compare both values. So we're going to appraise it as a house in a geographical area, almost like how the realtors will go out to place a house for sale in the market. They'll go out and find properties that sold, and it's basically we do the same things.
Super. One of the things I learned talking to you before the event, we've got some, so I'm pointing right down here, we've got some links, the property tax guide that the realtors can see the link there and read that. And then Mike's pointing down lower, there's some other links down below, because you taught me something today. You said you've got a great website, your Lexington County Assessor, where say you've got a buyer that's coming in to say Lexington to buy a house, they can actually go in there and find out what their tax bill, an estimate's going to be for the future.
Please remember it's an estimate only. The county cannot predict what the millage rate will be in future years. So if you go into the county website, we have a tax estimator, and you can go in there and put your value in and see what it would be at 6% compared to what it would be at 4%.
Right. And then, like, like we teach the realtors, you want to tell your clients to make sure that you're, any change of use, the buyer's responsible for applying for that 4%, because that's something they've got to do. And any change of use that might affect. And another thing you taught me today before the meeting was talking about when somebody buys in Lexington County about when they should come to you to apply for the 4%.
Yeah, we do have some people come in on the day of closing and wanting to make an application for legal residence. What we ask is for you to wait a couple weeks. Give us time to get it into the taxpayer's name. From the time a deed is recorded to the time I put it into the computer, it's about 7 days. So normally when the taxpayer gets their deed back from the realtor with the stamped that shows it's been recorded in the Register of Deeds office, you can bring that into the county, and we can, most likely, we already have it put in the taxpayer's name. If not, we'll transfer it right then.
Fantastic. And you can see down in these links down here below to I guess that's the bottom right of your screen, the realtors can read about 388 that was passed a few years ago, and then the 2011 compromise bill that was passed, as well as you can read tax laws in the South Carolina Code and the South Carolina Constitution. One question that's come up on the hotline recently, Sister Dolan is talking about with this compromise, and Cashion mentioned it, the 25% discount when you value it. Have the assessors talked about how you have some ways you could implement that?
Yes. The law requires us, if a property, let's just say, sells in 2011, and it's going to be it's a 6% property. It doesn't qualify if it's at the time of the sale is a 4% property. So this is only properties that are at 6%. They must come into the office and make an application for the exemption, and it will be a 25% exemption off the current market value of the property. That application, the way the law is written, must be made by January 30th. If a sale in 2011, we must have that application in by January 30th of 2012. If they come in after that date, there's no provision that allows us to give the 25% reduction. So that's very important that we let these people know who are buying 6% homes that is eligible out there.
So that's a great suggestion for if you did a closing and you're a buyer's rep in 2011, make sure you contact your buyers if they were buying a 6% property. As Assessor Dolan was talking about, make sure that they apply to get that 25% reduction on the value. Some other things that we often get questions about, tax sales. Say I'm a buyer's agent and I've got a client that's interested in tax sales. Does the assessor's office, do you get involved in tax sales?
The assessor's office in Lexington does not get involved in the tax sales. We have a delinquent tax office. They are responsible for doing the tax sales and putting on the auctions. The tax sales in Lexington County will be in November, and the newspaper will be having the advertisements, and you can go in and bid on it first. I think it's maybe the last week in November or the week before in November. And you can call the delinquent tax office and ask questions on that.
Super, thanks. And we talked about 6%. That was, Cashion was talking about the compromise we passed, and we talked about the 25% reduction in value. For the 4%, like you were saying earlier, back in 2006, they got tax relief, and we increased the sales tax so that the 4%ers are paying their fair share of taxes. One question we get sometimes is about the agricultural with the rollback taxes. Can you kind of give us a little primer on rollback taxes?
Sure. Property that qualifies for agriculture use, there are several sections of the law that says what qualifies. If you have a timber production, you got to have at least 5 acres or 10 acres of cropland. And just because you have 5 acres of timber doesn't mean it's going to qualify for agriculture use. I've had several on-site visits where there wasn't a lot of trees on the property. So a property that does qualify for the agriculture classification has a good side and a bad side. The good side is you're going to have very low taxes, approximately $2 to $3 an acre. The bad side is if you change the use of the property, the law requires you to pay back to the county the difference of what you would have paid at 6% compared to what you did pay at 4%. So if you're planning on holding a piece of property for 3 years and then changing the use, it may not be to your advantage to apply for the agriculture classification.
Super. That's a good point for any realtors that may not have their RLI designation, Realtor Land Institute designation. You're handling some, somebody's selling some family farmland that's going to get converted to retail use. Make sure that the contract addresses rollback taxes, who's going to pay that, because that can be, like you said, a significant amount. Another thing that we get calls about sometimes, probably more Richland than Lexington, but say I live in Greenville and my son's going to go to USC and I want to buy, instead of paying rent for him, I'm going to buy a house in Lexington County so he can go to USC. And one of the questions we get, sometimes you have parents trying to call their home in Greenville 4% and the kid's home in Columbia 4%, but they still may be claiming his dependent on their income taxes. Have you run into that issue?
Well, we do. We have a lot of people that will come in and put an interest in the property into the kid's name and get the 4%. And even I have some being put in the child's name fully while he's at school. They can qualify. They can qualify for that 4%. But once that child moves out of the property, and maybe they want to hold on to it and rent it for future college students, the law requires them to notify the county in which it is to remove the 4% exemption. There is a stiff penalty if you do not. So I urge you to do that. The penalties are very astronomical.
Thank you. And some of the other issues that we're working on, we've talked about the contract changes, adding the thing about reprorating post-closing. We've talked about the certificate of assessment. And then we talked about over there on the bottom right side, the links that all realtors that are on this webinar, either live or in archive, you need to pull those links up and read them. Assessor Dolan really commended the property tax guide that the Department of Revenue puts off. That's a fairly long document, so take your time, set aside, and read through that. It's pretty much a 101 on property taxes in South Carolina. And kind of going back to 101, I just want to kind of go over some assessable assessable transfers of interest. Obviously sale of property, any rent. Cashion's got a couple questions on the audience. I'm sorry, I'll read them. So we got Chris Bailey, he's our Governmental Affairs Director down in Charleston.
Two similar questions. Walton and Chris both have very similar questions.
The first one, Chris Bailey, up in Greenville, Governmental Affairs Director up in Greenville, Greater Association of Realtors. I hear from members in the upstate that on some transactions, commercial, residential, that when the value of sales price has dropped below the county's previous assessment, that the county is not going down to meet the point of sale price, they're only going to go up. So this is kind of the, when the market was going up, point of sale, a lot of times when they went to the assessable transfer of interest, the assessment would go up. Now that we're in a market where you may even have some price declines, Assessor Dolan, what are some issues you're looking at when you're looking at that assessable transfer of interest when maybe the price has gone down, but you're looking back at past years?
Well, one thing we do need to know is, when did the sale occur? Did the sale, if a sale occurred in 2010, the ATI, which is the assessable transfer of interest, will not occur until the 2011 year. So it's not in the year that the transfer occurs, it's the following year. I think Mr. Bailey's question was that the county's not dropping the value. The bottom line is you've got to find out what is the market value of the property. And I know in Lexington County, if the market value of the property is below the previous assessment value, and that's the new market value, and an ATI has occurred, we will lower the value. The law says if it's an ATI, you can reassess it at the current market value. So if there's counties in the upstate, if they can determine what the market value of that property is, then you can appeal it. Appeal it to the county assessor's office.
Super, fantastic answer. And kind of a follow-up that, we're seeing, with foreclosures in this economy, foreclosures and short sales where you have distressed sales. What are some appraisal issues when you're dealing, say you've got a neighborhood where you've got some that are kind of, arm's length transaction, other kind of distressed sales, foreclosure REOs. How do you look at this?
Well, there are sales in neighborhoods where there could be a lot of foreclosures, and that will have a good effect on the market value of the property. If you have one foreclosure in a subdivision and you have 6 normal sales, maybe that foreclosure did not affect the value. Again, if you have a lot of foreclosures, yes, because the foreclosures are competing with the properties that are not in foreclosure, and that can have an effect. If you have a foreclosure in a neighborhood and then that property is off the market, as it gets sold, then you have to see what the property sells for after that, and that's a tough issue, especially if you've got a lot of foreclosures in a certain neighborhood.
Thank you. Was there
We
another?
also, we have a question from Wendy Thompson. She asks, addressing the student living and family home in one county as a 4% and family living in another home at 4%, can there be 2 primary homes? No. You can only, as a single person or as a married couple, you may only have one owner-occupied 4% property.
That's kind of like what Assessor Dolan was talking about. If you did have a child, and we're talking about a child 18 to 22 going to college, you could deed the property to them while they're there and get it. And then, like you said, once they graduated, if it turned into a rental, if they didn't stay there for their job, then maybe they do then it would go back up to 6%.
That is correct. A 16-year-old, the law doesn't allow that to be claimed as a legal residence. I think it has to be 18, and if they're still carried under the parents' income taxes, they have to be at least 18.
Yeah, that's a good footnote, because we've gotten some calls about that in the past where the assessor determined that the 18 to 22-year-old college student was still being claimed as a dependent on their family's income taxes, and the assessor made an argument that because they were dependent, like Cashion was talking about, that's one family unit, and you can't have a 4%, at college and back home. So that's an issue to address.
And that was the correct information a couple years ago, but they have passed within the last couple of years for the college student who they're buying it and letting the child live there while he's in school. But please remember, when he graduates and he no longer uses it, they're responsible to notifying the assessor.
Super.
Okay, we got another, Walden wants some insight on the question. Please explain how revised point of sale is a benefit to buyers today with home values which have gone down 30 to 40%. Says he doesn't see where it's a benefit today, whereas in 2006 it may have helped.
Well, just initially to be clear, this is, if you're a 4% home buyer, your status quo under the legislation that was passed. If a 6% buyer of a residential property, you would be affected by this bill. How are you dealing with those scenarios where you've got a 30 to 40% market value drops facing the new law that was passed this year?
If there's no ATI, assessable transfer of interest, the law requires us to appraise it as of the last reassessment date. And in Lexington County, the sales up to 12/31/2009. And I think there was a question here about 2008. That is the last reassessment date those are the sales up to that date that we have to use until the next reassessment cycle, or if an ATI occurs. If an ATI occurs, then we can reassess it at market value.
That's a good point for appeal. So say I live in Lexington County. If I were going to appeal my property, I don't look at current market value today when I'm making my appeal. I'll look at when you reassessed it, which would
sales
be
up to 12/31/2009, and in the economy at that time, it had started to go down, but it takes a good 2.5 to 3 years to do a countywide reassessment. So you take a lot of sales using models and regression analysis and try to come up with what is an estimate of market value. What the realtors need to understand is we're appraising mass quantities of properties at one time, putting them in geographical areas. Do we get 100% every time accurate? No. That's what an appeal process is for, and we'll go through the appeal process with the taxpayer. And again, if the taxpayer doesn't agree with what the assessor or the appraiser has done on the property, there is a Board of Assessment Appeals where the taxpayer can come in, present his sales, we can present our sales, and then the Board of Assessment Appeals will make a decision. If they still don't like that, it goes through the courts, administrative law court, circuit court, and Supreme Court.
Super. That's another good point for some of the realtors, because square footage is often an issue. when you're looking at square footage and tax records versus other appraisals, your appraisers, when they're out there, they're not going inside the property, they're measuring a bunch of properties. So those square footages may be a little bit different from when you have an appraiser that goes inside and sees, you know, an unfinished or finished room, whereas your appraisers are just on the exterior.
Yeah, we'll appraise based on the outside and take the building permits and then take the building plans. But as we all know, sometimes when you get the building plans, sometimes things are added or taken out. And when they present the plans, they're presenting it at the beginning. So when we get the CO on the house, we go out there and measure, we take the plans and try to look to see if that's what's built. A lot of times things are changed. So if we got the square footage over or under, let us know. You know, name and again, let's just get it accurate.
Super.
We have a lot of questions right now. Charlie Ray asks if
Charlie, I know there have been some issues with this, particularly in the coastal markets. There's legislation pending in the Senate. Senator McConnell has introduced a bill for probably the last 3 sessions that would guarantee the 4% assessment to somebody in the scenario that you referenced. Has the bill gone anywhere? No. Is that an issue in Lexington County? Have you dealt with that?
No, Lexington County, we don't have that much of an issue as you would down on the beach with the summer months. Aiken County sometimes has, when their masters is in town, they may have 2 weeks of rental. So I don't have a lot of it. I have not studied that part of the law a lot, so because it's just not an issue in Lexington County.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah, the law rate is 14 days. Huh?
Another person asked,
There's
do you
the
have
bill
to
that
deed a
specifically deals
property
with 90.
to the college student, or can you add them to your deed and still qualify for the 4% under that scenario?
Currently, the way the law reads, it must be owner occupied. You must be an owner, you must occupy it. We have some people deeding at percentages. You just don't go into the county assessor's office and say, I want to add that my son or daughter on the property. You've got to actually deed it to them, and the deed must be recorded in the Register of Deeds office to qualify.
Which is an assessable transfer of interest.
Which is an ATI.
And you need to, you know, before you do that, you need, you know, to talk to your attorney, because once you deed it over, they own it. So
Right.
if they were to go out and get a bunch of liens on the property or sell it, or they could, I mean, there's a whole bunch of legal issues. You need to make sure you talk to your attorney. And kind of talking about the questions, Assessor Dolan was kind enough to say if we run out of time or we have extra questions after the webinar, if you're watching this in the archive, you can email it to info@screaltors.org, and we can get it to Cashion or myself or Assessor Dolan at Lexington County.
One person just wanted to point out that the problem realtors face is when a prospective seller wants to list his or her home for sale, and they've received a new reassessment statement with the fair market value, which is 30 to 40% higher than the current market conditions. It is a very difficult task to convince the sellers to accept a realistic listing price in order to.
Yeah, really, one thing that we've started providing that's a good help with convincing sellers about realistic prices is the 10K market reports. The executive committee approved those, so make sure that you're getting those market reports. That's a good way to show your prospective sellers what's really happening in the market and what are some more realistic expectations for a listing price.
And another person said, just to confirm, if the owner of a 6% property that bought property in 2011, they need to go to the county and apply to get that 25% reduction. It will not automatically be applied.
That's correct.
That is correct. And please remember, that application must be made with the county assessor before January 30th, the following year after the ATI or the sale.
And they want to say it's 25% off the value of the property or the tax bill for the 6% property.
25% off the value of the property. If you buy a 6% property and you get the 25% reduction, and then 2 years later, the taxpayer comes in and declares it his 4%, the exemption will be gone.
And then I think another footnote to that too is that if you take that 25% off, it's not going to go below the old tax value. That's kind of the baseline.
That's right, that's right. Currently, when you have a reassessment, the county actually uses two values. You have a taxable value and a market value. The taxable value means that if the taxable value is less than the market value, that means that the property has gone up more than 15% from the previous reassessment. So they're already being exempt from the market value to the taxable value. So if somebody buys a piece of property, that 25% cannot go below not the taxable value, but the market value that the county has placed on the property.
Thank you. That's important to know. And then if, say I've got a buyer client and that's going to be their homestead, or they're blind, disabled, veteran, what's their procedures for applying for those tax credits?
Okay, the state of South Carolina has an exemption called homestead exemption. If you're permanently disabled, over the age of 65, you're eligible for an exemption. You must go to the county auditor of the county you live in and make an application for the homestead exemption. It's only for primary residents. So if you own a secondary resident, your discount does not go with the secondary resident. It only goes with the primary residents. If you've got a client who is a 100% disabled veteran, they are eligible for a tax exemption on 1 acre. But they must apply for that through the Department of Revenue. So you just don't come into the county and say, I'm exempt from taxes because I'm a disabled veteran. You must go to the Department of Revenue in Columbia and fill out the necessary paperwork, and then they will notify the county that this individual is exempt from taxes. And they're only exempt from 1 acre. So if you own 5 acres, you're exempt from 1 acre in the house. In Lexington County, what we do is we'll exempt that 1 acre in the house, but they will pay taxes on the remaining acreage at the appropriate ratio.
That's a good point about acreage, probably something you run in Lexington County. Say my home is on a large acreage. How much acreage is under the 4%?
The current law allows you to have up to 5 acres at legal residence.
And then the rest would be taxed?
At 6%, or if it qualifies for agriculture use, the agricultural exemption. One thing that you must note, that if you buy a lot in a subdivision whose 6 or 7 acres, but the subdivision has deed restrictions that says it can be used for residential purposes only, there's a good chance that property is not going to qualify for the agriculture exemption, but you'll get the full exemption up to 5 acres, and anything over the 5 acres will go to the 6% classification.
Got another person who's asking if the 25% reduction application is online anywhere, or is it county?
I currently do not have it online right now, but if somebody calls, we'll mail it to, or fax it to them, or email it to them. Again, you put it online, we spend more time trying to correct it when it comes back in, because they may have an incorrect tax map number, an incorrect name, and stuff like that. So if somebody calls and wants one, what we'll do is we'll fill out the top half of the form so we know which property they're wanting to qualify for the exemption.
Super. And then this is really to educate. We've got about 14,000 realtor members around in the state. Sister Dolan, if you could speak to the realtors, what are some things that you would want the realtors to know about your office?
If you have questions, call us. The name of the game is get the correct information out there. We've had some taxpayers come in and say, well, my realtor said this, or my realtor said that, and a lot of times my attorney said this. All we want is the correct information going out. So if you got a client buying a house, they have questions, and you're not 100% sure, please give us a call. We'll be glad to explain it to you.
We do have a couple more questions. USC, should I buy the property and include him as a buyer in order?
Yes, I guess you can go ahead and include him at the time of the sale. Please remember, it's going to be an ATI, but then as long as it is in his name, he can go to the county assessor and make an application I think there's legislation out there right now, percent of ownership. So if you only own a 25%, there may, in the future, only qualify for 25% legal residence. So be careful with that because that can change.
That's a good point, because say I send my kid to USC and there's a 4-bedroom and they rent out the other 3 bedrooms to roommates. So that's some other issues. Make sure you talk to your closing attorney. And a good point about getting the information right. Realtors, when you attend closing, make sure the closing attorney is given copies of the settlement statement, the tax bills, the deeds to the homeowner, so that at least they have some information when they call the assessor's office, right?
One thing that's a major concern in our offices is incorrect mailing addresses. We'll have a taxpayer who buy a lot and they'll put the mailing address of the vacant lot. So we'll mail the tax bill there, it comes back. So if you're sitting in a closing with a taxpayer, talk to the taxpayer. Is that where, look on the deed where the attorney has typed the grantee's address and ask him, is that where you want your bills to go to?
That's a great
It's
point.
very important because we want to get all the information out to the appropriate taxpayer.
Question, Kim?
We have a few statements.
Counties, not Lexington, tell people looked at by the IRS and in the state. All agents should.
That's going back to Assessor Dolan's point about that they have different values, as the market value and the assessed value of the property. So
And that taxpayer, I mean, that, the person that wrote that, he is correct. The IRS will look at what the market value of the property is at the time of the transfer. Somebody buys a piece of property and then they transfer it later, that difference in value. So yes, it is important. Bottom line, most taxpayers just want to know what the taxable value is. But that's why we have 2 values. You can appeal the taxable value and you can appeal the market value. By appealing the market value, would it get you a reduction in taxes? No, as long as it doesn't fall below the taxable value. But again, as the person that wrote that, he is correct. The IRS will probably look at that too.
yeah, that's another point we talk about. It's a little bit going off topic a little bit, but we're getting a lot of rumors about the health care, about the 3.8% tax that may be coming in sales in the future to pay for the health care. Go to realtor.org and read about it. You obviously, it's going to be taxed on the gain. So, for a couple, $500,000, and then there's an income for the couple, it's $250,000. So the couple would have to be earning more than $250,000. Their gain would have to exceed $500,000, and then that 3.8% tax would apply to it. That's a rumor that's going out there that we're getting calls about now.
We got another person who says, how does the point of sale affect the 4% homestead valuation? Example, they purchased in 2011 for $250,000. What would the taxable value be?
If they purchased a property in 2011 and the $250,000 is the market value of the property, for 2012, that property would be an ATI and it would be reassessed at market value. Can't guarantee that $250,000 is the market value. It will have to meet the definition, exposure to the market, whatever a market value would be, not a foreclosure. The person who wrote this put in homestead. Now, I see the 4%, but people are getting the homestead and the legal residence confused. If you're in the state of Florida, homesteads is legal residence. In South Carolina, homestead is different from legal residence. Legal residence is something that I will get because I'm under 65 and not disabled. But if you qualify because you're over the age of 65 and you qualify for the homestead exemption, permanently disabled, that's an extra $50,000 off the appraised value. Please remember when these clients, when you got your clients, you don't get the exemption the year you turn 65. You get it the following year. If you are selling a real estate to a person who lives out of state, they will qualify for the homestead after living in Lexington, after living in the state of South Carolina 1 solid year and then the following year. So if they buy it today from out of state, they must live here 1 year, would be October of 2012. They will be eligible for starting January 1st, 2013, and that's for the homestead exemption.
Super, that's important for the retirees moving in. We're
Yes.
getting tight on time. Cashion, if I'm a realtor and I want to get involved with property tax reform in 2012, what are some committees I can get on? Where can I donate RPAC? Some issues, what are some, if I was a realtor and I wanted to get involved?
Great question, Byron. I would get involved, number one, with your local association's legislative committee. I'd sign up and volunteer to serve on that. We get so many of our recommendations and policy ideas and policy critiques that they come from local legislative committees. SCR in 2012 will be doing some legislative forums around the state. We'll do about 8 of those where members will come to you, and then members in that area will be able to meet with the leadership of the association and talk about those issues such as property tax reform that most affect your business, and make a request that those should be added to South Carolina Realtors legislative agenda for the following legislative session. So we'll do those probably in the July to October timeframe in 2012. To prepare for the new legislative session in 2013. That's something new that we'll be introducing in 2012. RPAC, the Realtors Political Action Committee, is incredibly important to the work that we do at the South Carolina State House. RPAC does not buy votes. RPAC opens doors. It buys ears for a moment. And it helps you establish relationships locally, because all those funds are delivered locally by realtors living in the districts, and that helps you and your colleagues in your area build relationships with your local representatives and senators, so that when there's an issue pending on the Senate floor or the House floor, you can pick up the phone and call them, and they will know who you are, they will trust you, and hopefully take your advice when they go to vote. And it's very helpful to the work that I do as the association's lobbyist.
Super. And then if we have any questions, we'll get to those by email. We'll forward them to Assessor Dolan. And if you want to get in touch with us, you're watching this on the archive version, info@screaltors.org, and you can read those documents that are linked here. I want to thank Mike and Sharon, as always, our technical folks that are behind the scenes made this happen. And Assessor Dolan, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Again, if you have questions of Lexington County, I'm responsible for Lexington County. I'm not responsible for the other county. I'll be glad to answer you. If you have questions concerning another county, I urge you just to contact the assessor at that county. If you just don't feel like you're getting the right answer, you're not sure. Again, the name of the game is get the correct information out and go from there.
Super. Cashion?
I think that's the conclusion. I appreciate everybody for participating today, and please feel free to contact Byron or me at the office with any questions you have that may not have been addressed today.
That was our license plate. We use that money to raise money for homeownership. Those tags should be available in your local DMV soon. Thanks to the housing opportunity